if you love my channel and would like to show your support, please click on the link below this video and become the patron of the Ushanka Show. For as little as $1, you can help us grow and create the new, interesting videos about the life in Soviet Union.
Hello, comrades, and welcome back to Ushanka Show. Здравствуйте, товарищи. Today, as I promised, we're gonna talk about one specific, extremely interesting kind of bars that existed in Soviet Union since 1960s. The bars that Soviet people weren't allowed to attend. But before we start talking about these bars, we need to learn another Russian word. This word is valuta, which you can translate as a currency, but it's actually foreign currency. So in Soviet Union, any foreign currency would be called valuta. So American dollars, British pounds, Western German Deutschmarks were valuta. And of course, there'll be two kinds. Hard currency, твердая valuta, will be mentioned above dollars and Deutschmarks, French francs, and then of course you have other kinds which weren't having a lot of attention and respect. So most capitalistic currencies were so-called hard currency, твердая valuta. And we're going to talk today about currency bars, валютные бары. I actually would like to make a separate video about valuta and other aspects about how the Soviet citizens could have any foreign currency and how they could handle it. It's a really interesting topic, but I'd like to make a separate video. But this is what today is going on is we had bars in Soviet Union that were selling hard liquor and cocktails only for currency. What I mean for valuta. So for foreign currency, you weren't able to buy anything there with Soviet ruble. So imagine the situation in the Soviet Union. There are places where the Soviet citizens couldn't purchase things with the Soviet rubles. Think about it. So everything started pretty much after Khrushchev came to power. And several years later, we had this so-called thaw, ottepel. So Khrushchev kind of loosened up bolts and nuts a little bit in the Soviet system. So people weren't afraid as they were afraid under Stalin. At the same time, there were foreign tourists allowed to come to the Soviet Union. And apparently there were quite a few curious people who wanted to come and explore Moscow, Leningrad, and see Soviet Union. And along with the tourists who would come to Soviet Union, there were demand in the evening. They wanted to relax and have a good time, and they were looking for bars to spend time. But to their disappointment, they couldn't find any bars in any big city in Soviet Union. The company that handled the foreign tourists, and of course it was state-owned company Inturist, so they started getting requests from the foreign tourists, Americans, British, like, what's going on? Why don't you guys have bars? And in 1965, the very first hard currency bars opened in Moscow and in Leningrad. So two were open in Moscow, right in the hotels Metropole and Berlin. So those hotels were dedicated to foreign tourists. And one in Leningrad in hotel called Europe. And now we jump into the person named Alexander Kudryavtsev, who is official, the very first Soviet bartender. So this guy, he fell in love with the idea of mixing drinks while reading Ernest Hemingway as a teenager. And I personally have to admit I never read Ernest Hemingway. It's my downfall. So he had this idea he would like to do it. So after army service, which we're also going to talk about it one of these days, he attended a 2-year waiter classes at above-mentioned Inturist. So the Inturist, the state-owned company that handled foreign tourists, they actually had classes where they taught people how to handle foreigners as a waiter and so on. So he attended 2-year classes Of course, you learn English and German so you can speak some. And he became a bartender. Actually, Alexander in his story mentioned that he had a really hard time to get to those classes because of his so-called fifth line in the passport. And it's going to be another separate video, but in the fifth line in the passport, so every Soviet citizen, when he turned 16, he was getting a passport, except some peasants in the villages, they didn't get passports all the way to like middle of 1970s. And, you know, you have your name, your surname, your father's name, your date of birth. The fifth line was your nationality. So there was this hidden way of saying that person is a Jewish, is like he has a problem with his fifth line in the passport, or fifth chapter, there's something to say, пятая графа. So there's also a separate topic. Oh my goodness, it's like scary how many topics I still need to cover. But Jewish persons quite often in Soviet Union had a hard time getting specific jobs, getting to specific colleges because of their fifth line that says they're Jewish. And this guy was Jewish, so he at first couldn't get into the waiter classes, and he only pulling some strings and having like I mentioned before, blood, people he knew, he managed to get in those classes. And I believe I talked about drinking in Russia, in Soviet Union before, so we really don't mix drinks. There's not Soviet people. I personally never knew about such things like a screwdriver. The whole idea of mixing vodka with orange juices sound ridiculous. We didn't know anything about Bloody Marys. We just drank vodka straight. You know, we drink wine, beer, and it's just only Russian mix, Russian cocktail will be to drink some beer after you had some vodka, because then you get really drunk. And there's actually saying that drinking vodka without beer is like waste of money, because you can really get drunk if you add a little bit beer in the end after consuming quite a bit of vodka. So Alexander's first problem on his new job as a bartender, actually at that time, they weren't called bartenders, but we'll talk about it a little bit later, that there were no information about how to make drinks. They didn't have any recipes. So he pretty much had to come up with something on spot. So he had, they purchased, of course, foreign liquors, whiskeys, and all the other stuff. And then he was just asking clients like, okay, what kind of drink you want and what do you put on your drink? And he was learning just pretty much from his clients about how to mix different drinks, mix different cocktails in a bar. And since he was dealing with foreigners every day, that was a great opportunity to ask them to send back from their countries some items. So most people will beg, if you become, familiar with somebody, become a friend with American or British tourist, you ask him to send you jeans or some other cool things like cool t-shirt, something that Soviet people couldn't purchase. Well, Alex was asking his clients to send him books about drinks, about how to mix drinks, about recipes. And he, in the end, collected around 300 books. And in 1978, he wrote a book by himself called The Technology of Making Mixed Drinks. So he was, as I mentioned, officially he was the very first Soviet bartender. Another interesting detail about the very first Soviet bartender, or we say in Russian barman, that we actually didn't have the term, since we didn't have any bars, we didn't have any people like barman or bartender. The official title was buffetchik, which came from the word buffet, which is buffet. So there was kind of like so-called buffets, not like Chinese buffet where all you can eat, but there was the only place pretty much besides restaurants that they can serve you some vodka with your food. So he fought really hard to actually have a new title, bartender, or we say barman, instead of buffetchik, because buffetchik is like really old-fashioned, really not cool sounding title. And he prevailed, and there was official title now that you can become a bartender, barman, to work at the hard currency bars. So this Alexander guy seems like a very interesting character. He's in his 80s, but he's still helping young guys to learn the skills of being bartender. And he had quite a few famous guests at his time when he started working in the first hard currency bars in Moscow. He served Fidel Castro and his brother Raul. He served Khrushchev. And I haven't hard time to believe, but apparently he actually served Liz Taylor when she was visiting Leningrad, filming the movie Bluebird. You can guys verify the information. To be honest, I was too lazy to check. And he told his story how he met Liz Taylor. Apparently she was really tired of fans, so she was hiding in her room in Leningrad after filming. And then she realized that really no one knows her that much, so she started coming down and sitting at the bar and talking to Alexander, and he knew what was her favorite drink. I forgot to write it down, but he makes the drink for her. And she gave him a present for his wife. She gave Alexander her lipstick, was made for Liz. He said it was on the actual bottle, or not the bottle, but the container of lipstick. And unfortunately, after they used up the lipstick, they kept it as a souvenir. But then Alexander's daughter traded that lipstick container for some chewing gum, and that thing is gone. Probably is worth a lot of money now. And he admitted that, of course, if you work at the hard currency bar and deal with foreigners, you had to work with KGB. You had to be a Communist Party member. It was required. And they'll work for KGB. They'll be maybe asking him, hey, make sure this guy is getting drunk, or give us some kind of sign that he's ready to leave or go for a walk, because we want to make sure we have a guy ready to go to follow him. So they will have specific, signs, like he will maybe rub his ear or rub his nose after foreigner will tell him, his client say, hey, well, I'm ready to go, or I'm going to leave. He will just kind of send the sign so the KGB guys be ready to go and ready to follow. And of course, when there is alcohol, there are girls. So I'm not sure about how the KGB was utilizing any of those girls that were interested to meet foreigners. But there were cases if the foreigner meets a girl, brings it to the bar, then they go to his room. Then after she is trying to leave the hotel, the KGB guys will intercept her, and they'll have conversation, about proper behavior of the Soviet women, and you're not supposed to go, have sex with foreigners, stuff like that. So that's my story about these interesting hard currency bars in Soviet Union. As I mentioned earlier, it's kind of crazy to think about it, that regular Soviet person couldn't go. And I bet, of course, humans are humans, and if you have blood, you have your friend working as a bartender in a hard currency bar, and maybe he'll get you a bottle of whiskey, maybe, or something like that, or he will let you be at the bar just to hang out. So, those things like that. But the main problem with the hard currency in Soviet Union, that it was criminal punishment. It was Article 88 that you could get in trouble and get a jail time from 3 to 15 years with confiscation of all your belongings and exile, and even punishment by death for dealing with foreign currency. So that was a pretty hardcore law against owning and dealing in foreign currency in Soviet Union. So, of course, most Soviet people, they had no foreign currency, and they couldn't attend those hard currency bars. So I find it really bizarre that Soviet people in their Soviet country couldn't just go in specific places and enjoy quality drinks from the Soviet bartenders. All right, I hope you enjoyed the story. As always, I appreciate your likes and your comments. Don't forget to subscribe, share with your friends, share on social media, and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания.